Are you ready to explore the ultimate frontier of human existence? In a world racing toward artificial intelligence dominance, one profound question remains unanswered. Can human consciousness ever truly be digitized? Join Professor Alexander Kaplan as he challenges our deepest assumptions about the future of humanity. Discover why your brain isn't just a biological computer, it's something far more extraordinary. The gap between AI and human consciousness isn't just wide, it might be unbridgeable. A perfect digital copy of your mind would still never be you. Consciousness remains science's greatest mystery, but what if solving it means accepting we are more than the sum of our neural networks? What makes you uniquely human? Is it your memories, your neural connections, or something science still can't explain? Prepare to have your perceptions shattered in this mind-bending exploration of consciousness, technology, and what it truly means to be alive in the universe. My name is Alex, and this is Quantum Dialectica Podcast. Welcome, dear viewers, to the second episode of the Quantum Dialectica podcast. I'm delighted to host Professor Alexander Kaplan in this episode.
Hello and welcome to all viewers.
Today we continue our discussion on fascinating topics related to the human brain that have recently gained widespread attention. As you know, subjects like technological singularity, digitization of consciousness, post-humanity, and similar concepts have become popular. In the last decade, numerous films and series about humanity's hybrid or hyper future, if I may use that term, have been produced. These ideas have gained immense popularity and captivated our consciousness. Humans now eagerly anticipate an ambiguous future where people might become like demigods when the human body undergoes qualitative upgrades. Yuval Noah Harari addresses this topic in his famous book, Homo Deus, while futurist Raymond Kurzweil describes how our future might look. I'd like to read you a passage from his book because I find it particularly intriguing. Kurzweil writes, "In The Singularity is Near, we will increasingly become non-biological beings until we reach a state where the non-biological part dominates and the biological part becomes insignificant. However, this non-biological mechanical component will be powerful enough to model, simulate, and fully understand the biological part. Therefore, if the biological part suddenly disappeared, it would hardly matter because the non-biological part would have completely assimilated it." This raises the question, what about the brain? Today we can replace kidneys, hearts, there are organs that can be transplanted. Let's assume that in the future, all of this could be replicated using 3D printers. But this cannot be done with the brain, especially when dealing with brain deterioration that comes with aging.
Actually, even the pancreas cannot be replicated with 3D printers. And there's currently no theoretical foundation that allows us to consider this possibility. Some organs can be replicated, like the tracheal structure, but success in this field remains very modest. So imagine the complexity of the brain. Generally speaking, there's no basis for thinking about recreating the brain on 3D printers or even 5D printers. The reason is quite simple. While the brain is certainly a material entity, and theoretically, if magical printers existed, they could certainly replicate all 86 billion neurons, the trillion connections between neural cells, and the thousands of billions of neural links, they could never replicate the content of this brain. Let's imagine you bought a new computer and placed it on the table. It won't work unless you provide it with software. The same applies to the brain. It won't function without thoughts and ideas. These are its programs. But how can you replicate a program on a printer? The program in our brain is more complete than those in all computers because it's created by the brain itself, yet it doesn't have physical characteristics.
And more importantly, this program isn't static. It doesn't have fixed properties, but changes continuously.
Absolutely correct. It's as if you're reading my thoughts directly. The issue is that the brain is a dynamic structure. In every second, at every moment, signals are continuously transmitted. So what's the use of fixing a single moment in the brain's life when in the next moment, the brain will be different. We would need to replicate and fix every moment of its activity, which is impossible, of course. As soon as a thought appears, and it's something immaterial, it begins to modify itself and influence brain activity. Do you notice what magic occurs in this reciprocal
And
relationship?
this specific reality represents the most complex challenge for any attempt to simulate or recreate brain function on computer equipment, no matter how modern or whatever processing speeds they operate at, correct?
You know, there's a famous figure in information technology. I'm referring to Jan LeCun, who invented the most advanced artificial neural networks. He has approximately calculated the speed at which computing machines would need to perform to execute brain functions, estimating it at 10 to the power of 18 operations per second. This quantity is called exaflops. Machines with such speeds exist now, yet we haven't been able to create an artificial brain, and we realize that speed has nothing to do with the issue.
That's exactly what I meant.
We can upgrade processors as much as we want, but if there's no logic in the communication between these processors, we won't achieve anything. This is primarily because our brain isn't just a device for calculating moves in chess, for example. Life in this world involves modeling and simulating the entire external physical material world, and that's what our brain contains. The brain, in this case, doesn't exist in a metal or silicone structure, but in a sensitive body that feels pain, sadness, and all emotions and reactions. The synthesis of all these phenomena happening in our brain at incredible speed occurs within the human body with the purpose of adapting this body to its biological habitat and surrounding environment.
Yes, and perhaps we can add an important point here. We observe something and then recreate it in memory, but it no longer matches the world image that the brain previously observed. Thus, sensory perception is always individual. This is precisely why different witnesses to a traffic accident might vary in describing the car, the driver, and so on. You explain in an interesting way how the brain deconstructs the image seen by the eyes and then reconstructs it. This reconstructed image is completely unique and exclusively belongs to a specific brain. This is also where the main problem lies. When computers operate, they work in the same ways, whereas each individual brain performs unique functions specific to that person. This is the central problem, correct?
Correct, this is the main problem. But we must understand that any mechanical reflectors of reality, like light sensors and cameras, only reflect the distribution of light in space, resulting in our seeing objects and shapes. The brain, however, behaves in a completely different manner. The eye doesn't have the physical capability to transfer an image directly to the brain. Why? Because everything we see reaches the brain through the lens of the eye, which is an optical system. The image falls on the back surface of the eye, where the light-receiving cells are located. Their number's not small, about 126 million in each eye, which provides a very high degree of image precision. So the image falls on the back surface of the eye on the layer of photosensitive elements. How does it then reach our brain, where there's no special system for transmitting images, as in modern cameras? In the human eye, there are only nerve fibers that transmit neural impulses through the optic nerve. There's no image of the surrounding space, just a scattering of neural impulses. These neural impulses reach the visual areas of the brain and then diverge and distribute across all brain regions. So the image falls on the back surface of the eye on the layer of photosensitive elements. How does it then reach our brain, where there's no special system for transmitting images, as in modern cameras? In the human eye, there are only nerve fibers that transmit neural impulses through the optic nerve. There's no image of the surrounding space, just a scattering of neural impulses. These neural impulses reach the visual areas of the brain and then diverge and distribute across all brain regions. Where is the image of the physical material world in all of this? Theoretically, I have no ability to see you in the physical material reality. And by the way, you shouldn't be able to see me either, but our brains create a perception as if each of us sees the other. This happens because the brain performs an amazing magical process. It recreates our entire external physical world, and we live within these structures it has reconstructed. Reconstruction isn't even an accurate description for this aspect. Moreover, this reconstruction occurs in the living body of a specific person. It's highly individual and doesn't happen solely based on the distribution of neural impulses, but also on individual experience, on how this or that person previously perceived this or that reality. The brain takes all of this into account and adjusts the image we see. We all live in the images created and shaped by our brains, and these images, by the way, are individual and specific to each person, naturally varying. Here I return to your question, is it possible or not to extract this unique reality structure from the brain and transfer it to a computer? The answer is no, because the computer won't be able to decode this reconstruction, as decoding requires all of our body's receptors. The issue is that when a new construction appears in the brain, when a brain image forms, our vision isn't limited to the space we're in. The brain goes beyond that. Let's assume I haven't yet been behind this wall and don't know what's there, but the brain, in order to have a complete conception of the world, must complete the picture. It adds conceptions of what exists behind this corner that I can't see. This process of completing the picture through guessing is done by the brain to be prepared to encounter this image in reality.
But are there any conceptions of when in history Homo sapiens began to complete the picture in the way we know today?
Your observation is very accurate. Indeed, at some point, according to evolution theory, humans specifically acquired this ability, the ability to see through walls, if I may use that expression, not in a mystical, esoteric sense, but in terms of the ability to predict. That is, based on current facts and previous experience, a person can assume what exists behind a barrier and across a time interval, or can recall visual images from the past. Even if we didn't notice some details at the time, our brain is capable of reconstructing this past with vivid images and presenting them to us.
Why did the cerebral cortex, the neocortex, develop so wildly, specifically in Homo sapiens, where this species subsequently became distinguished from other living beings precisely by intelligence, specifically by the development of those brain regions that allowed reconstruction, prediction, projection, imagination, and creativity in embodying any visualizations? If we start from Darwin's theory of evolution, we must consider that everything in the world has a biological storage for species survival and for passing genomes to future generations. If we follow this theory, what was the advantage of this particular model of selection that occurred in humans?
The great advantage lies in how evolution before humans worked on changing the body. All animal forms are modifications to the body, adaptations to their biological habitat or living environments. Some animals have dense fur protecting them from cold, while others lack this because they live in warm environments. Skin color varies between animals. Some have tails, among other differences. These are all physical adaptations. The pinnacle of one evolutionary path had to culminate in a being that doesn't adapt its body, but instead begins to adapt nature to suit its requirements. This being is represented by Homo sapiens, who became intelligent in the following sense. Let's imagine a new ice age began after an asteroid impact, releasing dust clouds that covered the sun and changed the climate, causing temperatures to drop in extreme cold for a very long period. Before humans existed, evolution spent thousands of years teaching animal bodies to grow hair and fur, but intelligent humans lived in caves, used fire for heating, and covered themselves with animal skins. They didn't adapt their bodies, but solved the problem through intelligence, bypassing thousands of years of evolution.
Is it now known what the sources of this modeling process are in the brain? What happened in the brain at the morphological, structural level or the biochemical level? What occurred in the brains of early humans that allowed them to perform this modeling?
Only now do we understand that a three-dimensional model airplane exists to train pilots. Today we can use three-dimensional models to understand how planes work in real conditions, but after creating such models, many parameters must be monitored. Creating these models requires very powerful large computers to ensure that models of the physical world function properly. Enormous analytical information processing capabilities are necessary. The human brain possesses such ability. Evolution created this enormous structure in the brain to simulate physical reality. It turns out that physical reality has been simulated in a living organ that matched this reality in terms of capability. But what do large or small capabilities mean? Regarding the evolution of the cerebral cortex, we find that approximately 80% of brain neurons are specifically located in this cortical layer.
And that's what makes us human?
Yes, this thin cortex grew and expanded to increase brain capacity. Animals closely related to us in terms of cortical evolution, such as apes and dolphins, have about 1 or 2 billion neurons in their cortex. We have 22 billion cells, meaning our cortical power is over 10 times greater than these animals. But what does 22 billion neurons mean? We shouldn't just count individual neurons as if counting transistors and computer processors. We must also calculate the connections between them. This is the capacity that models or simulates physical
But do
reality.
you know what opponents of evolution theory question? They question evolutionary jumps, these discontinuities, meaning the irregularity of evolution. We know from evolutionary theory that evolution occurred primarily in jumps, and opponents ask why this jump related to the cerebral cortex happened in hominids. Why did this jump allow humans to suddenly surpass other animals by leaps and bounds, while, according to evolution theory, all animals strive for advantage and should have the same opportunities? Evolution opponents argue it's not logical that this jump occurred in human ancestors, but not in other animals with relatively advanced brains. Perhaps that's why imaginative hypotheses have emerged, suggesting we're descendants of civilizations from beyond Earth, a hybrid species from the mating of advanced beings with human ancestors, resulting in Homo sapiens. Other theoretical concepts suggest that we and all living beings on Earth are merely a laboratory for civilizations tens of thousands of years more advanced than us, monitoring us without interfering. But from an evolutionary perspective, from the viewpoint of classical sciences, evolutionary psychology, or neurobiology, is there an explanation for why early humans specifically increased the number of neurons in the cortex many times over during a short evolutionary period? Perhaps language was the influencing factor?
The alternative theories you mentioned contain serious errors. I can immediately say that evolution theory is, in any case, the most logical. I'll explain why. When evolution opponents express their doubts, they primarily cite the sharp evolutionary jump as one of their arguments. We'll address the other arguments shortly. Regarding this argument about the sharp jump, they ask how this is possible, pointing out that there were no intelligent humans for hundreds of millions of years, and suddenly in the last 5 or 6 million years, primates began evolving more rapidly toward Homo sapiens. How and why did this jump occur?
And it happened specifically in higher primates, not in any other species.
Yes, exactly. But now we don't question why such a jump occurred in technology. For centuries, horses carried loads and pulled carriages in the streets, and suddenly within years, a sharp jump occurred and horses disappeared from the streets. Where did they go? Cars appeared instead. Why did this sharp jump happen? Why weren't horses gradually replaced over hundreds of years before cars took their place? The answer is because the previous level of technology created the foundation for the sharp change.
May I object immediately? Technology in general is a product of human intelligence. My question concerns the stage before human intelligence emerged. Therefore, I think it's incorrect to compare evolution as a biological process that moves extremely slowly with the results of civilization produced by the human mind. For example, humans invented the steam engine, which became a pillar of the Industrial Revolution, and after a period, humans learned to split the nucleus, made nuclear bombs, and reached a new stage of energy production. But this is the product of the human mind, not the long, complex biological evolutionary process. We cannot compare biological evolution with civilizational development.
Let me explain. Yes, language fully emerged and the jump occurred.
Yes, that's my question. How did this happen?
But this isn't the only factor. Qualitative change isn't invented by humans, but by the passive, dormant process itself, the process of evolution itself. Let's take insects as an example. This is a very prominent group of living beings on Earth, well adapted to their living environment, a masterpiece of evolution. What's the need to give these insects powerful brains when their perfection specifically focuses on being small with antennae? Why give them a brain on top of that? Evolution doesn't care about increasing intelligence in organisms. Its goal is for them to become perfectly adapted to their biological environment. The cockroach, by the way, has lived on Earth for 400 million years, which proves it's complete and extraordinarily perfect in itself, even compared to humans in terms of structure. Therefore, evolution never needed to strive to continue changing the cockroach and making it somehow intelligent. In general terms, it's intelligent in a way as long as it lives for hundreds of millions of years until our time, despite large chemical companies fighting against it. As for why intelligence doesn't exist in all species, it's because intelligence isn't the only evolutionary formula for adapting to the biological environment. Intelligence is indeed one of the possibilities, but not the only one. Cockroaches and other animals, everything that has survived until now, are different formulas or possibilities of evolution, each reaching perfection. Therefore, there's absolutely no need to believe that evolution seeks to develop the brain specifically in all creatures. The truth is that it seeks what this creature or that needs and adapts everything to the living environment according to necessity.
Well, if we start from the theory of language evolution as the main theory regarding brain development, what came first? Similar to the puzzling dilemma of whether the chicken or the egg came first, did the evolution that occurred in the brain lead to the emergence of language, or did the first signs of language and the use of certain words influence the development of the cerebral cortex and the appearance of a large number of neurons and many connections between them as speech developed? What came first? What was the foundation?
There's a connection and mutual influence here. Notice that in different languages around the world, there are 30 to 32 sounds. And in reality, dolphins produce almost the same number of sounds as do apes. In this sense, the number of sounds is the same, but humans can synthesize these sounds.
Indeed, the number of letters in languages is approximately similar.
Yes, when the possibility of synthesizing sounds appeared, the possibility of a large number of combinations and structures of signals also emerged. All that remained was to arrange these signals grammatically to produce words separated by phrases and so on. No one deliberately planned this. The process wasn't intentional. Everything was created by the force of nature and evolutionary pressure. The advantage went to those who had the ability to speak and use a greater number of sound signal combinations. Gradually, the primitive ancestor language emerged, which in itself gave the brain the ability to comprehend the diversity of material things and phenomena through their names or through concepts, as psychologists say.
So as I understand it, as long as there is no designation or naming of this thing or that, linguistically, humans cannot imagine it. But when there's a word for something, this opens up the possibility for humans to retrieve it from memory and visualize or imagine it. And this is what develops the brain.
That's correct, but this was at a later stage. In the first stage, it was necessary to know how to deal with concepts. If we don't have the concept of tiger, we won't keep it in our minds and won't be able to connect it with a concept related to another animal. But when we have the concept of tiger and a comprehensive concept, meaning different beasts and many other concepts, humans can then synthesize these concepts and combine them together. This is how evolution began in thinking. The synthesis of concepts formed an exercise for brain activity. All this began developing the connections between neurons in our brains and increasing the number of neurons. The first words appeared, and all of this culminated in language.
Professor, thank you, and let's continue our conversation next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear viewers. With this, we have reached the end of our discussion for today. In this episode, we spoke with Professor Alexander Kaplan. Join us next month for new episodes of the Quantum Dialectica podcast. Don't forget that this podcast is available on all streaming platforms. Thanks for watching, and stay well.